I don't know what's going on with the lights. Don't, no more lights, huh? Are the lights working there?
I'll work. I'll see what I can do.
Okay.
You're live. I got you unmuted again.
All right. All right, let's go ahead and get started here in a minute. Yeah, this lighting's always been a problem in here, right here in this corner. I have bad enough time seeing my own notes without it being dark. Okay. All right, let's ask the Lord to bless our time. Heavenly Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for just a little warmer weather here this time of the year. Thank you for the beautiful leaves, and it reminds us that seasons change here, and it's just beautiful to watch your creation changing throughout the year here. We're so blessed to have eyes to look upon that. Lord, we pray that you would give us ears now to hear your word. I pray, Father, that as we begin to study the book of Daniel, that you would open our eyes to its significance and help us to realize and understand the blessings that are still future for the nation of Israel and us. And Father, we pray that that would cause us to live our lives in a more worthy manner. And thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so it's been almost a month since we've met. I was on vacation a couple of weeks, had a good restful time in Tennessee. Went to a great church there, went to a good Sunday school class. That was good. I can't pronounce the name of the church, but it's Chippewa Grove something, or that first one. I can't pronounce that at all, but I doubt anyone from there is watching our Sunday school class. But really appreciate them making us welcome, that kind of stuff. So if we retire to Tennessee, that's a potential church home. So we've been looking at Daniel, and we're looking at the authorship and dating. Very important because really Daniel represents, I think, some of the best evidence for the inspiration of the scriptures, because Daniel is going to describe human events in human history that are still yet future. They were at the time there. He's going to describe the rise of Gentile world kingdoms. He's going to lay out the exact time when the Jewish Messiah would come to the nation of Israel. He describes a future world leader and really the timetable of all the future judgments that the Lord has planned for the unbelieving world. Now, dating Daniel, we want to finish that today, and we'll talk about the language, but since we haven't met in such a long time, I want to do maybe a 5 to 10 minute summary of what we've talked about before, in case you've missed some classes, just bring you up to speed. There's two main views concerning the authorship of Daniel, and none of this is in this week's notes, by the way. I'm going through previous week's notes just as a brief summary. There's two main views. One is Daniel is who he says he is. He was, served in Nebuchadnezzar's court, served in Darius's court, been between 600 and 500 BC. Not those all 100 years, but that's the time frame. And Daniel himself wrote down the events of what transpired there. That's the first view. That's the classical view. It's always been the view of the church since, about the late 300-400s, when one particular person objected to that and wrote a whole bunch of things against Christians. So he didn't like Christians at all. But he actually formed the basis for the second view of the dating and authorship of Daniel. That's called the Maccabean view. And why is it called the Maccabean view? Well, if you flip over to the last page in this week's notes, I have a language timelines here. Okay? The Maccabean view typically is that Daniel was written in the 2nd century BC. Okay, and if you look at the timeline, you see the fall of Babylon is about 538 BC. So I've stuck it in between 5 and 600 there. That's when the events of Daniel took place. That's the classical view when Daniel wrote these things down. The Maccabean view is between 1 and 200 BC. Specifically, most of them date at 165, very close to that. That's the Maccabean theory. Now, notice that if Daniel was written in 5 to 600, all that span of time, the fall of Babylon and the rise of the Medo-Persian Empire, the Grecian Empire, and the Roman Empire, all of that would be future to Daniel's time. However, the Maccabean theory, it would all have been past events. So this is a very critical issue here in dating Daniel. Okay, so if we look at history, okay, the history of issues that the Maccabean theory folks tend to bring against Daniel, and we covered these, I think, in the second week. There are basically four things that they would criticize the classical view of Daniel being written in the 5th, 6th century BC. Okay, the first thing they would say is that Daniel 1:1 contradicts Jeremiah 46:2 for the year of the siege of Jerusalem. Okay, and that's kind of interesting because in Daniel it says in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and over in Jeremiah it says in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, Nebuchadnezzar seized Jerusalem. And that was easily explained that in the Babylonian, system of rulership, they actually don't count the ascension year of a king to the throne as part of his rulership. Lots of pomp and circumstance in that first year, so they really don't count that. But the Jewish dating system, they do count it. So that fully explains the difference between the 3rd year and the 4th year. Daniel, having been in the Babylonian court with Nebuchadnezzar, he chose the Babylonian scheme. Okay, perfectly understandable. Okay, the second thing they complain about is Daniel, the first couple of verses, presupposes a Babylonian siege and deportation that neither the Bible nor any other extra-biblical reference describes. Okay, and basically we went through and showed the different times and that kind of stuff. There were 3 different phases for the Babylonian exile. Daniel here in the 1st chapter just records the first one, and it's not recorded anywhere else. However, it's easily shown that Nebuchadnezzar was in that area of Egypt and Palestine, Jerusalem, in 605 BC. So it's certainly enough evidence, I think, in my mind, to show that there was a 3-phase deportation and destruction of Jerusalem that Nebuchadnezzar did. One in 605, a second one where Ezekiel himself was also brought, and in the third one, he completely destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. So bottom line is Daniel records the first one, and Chronicles and other sources depict the others. Okay. The third thing that they complain about is Daniel confuses the Babylonian kings. He only records that Nebuchadnezzar was king and then Belshazzar. We know from archaeology that there were several kings in between. And for the longest time, no one even believed in the existence of Belshazzar. So the Maccabean thesis, basically said, this Belshazzar doesn't even exist. And lo and behold, some archaeological evidence was uncovered, a cuneiform tablet from Nabonidus, which is Belshazzar's father. He makes direct reference to his son by name. Okay, so the existence of Belshazzar was established there, and that really put a nail in the coffin in the Maccabean thesis in terms of history or so. And then the fourth thing that they claim is that Daniel invents the person of Darius the Mede. Okay, and we looked at some of the evidence for that, and it's interesting that over time that one really has been put to bed too, and the solution to that is Darius the Mede was actually Cyrus the Great. He was Cyrus the Great, the Medo-Persian king. And some of the evidence that was really interesting is Herodotus. He was a Greek historian. He mentions twice in his writings that Cyrus originally had been given a different name by his mother at birth. Okay, and he only later came to be known as Cyrus. Okay, and it's also known that Cyrus's mother, her name was Mandane of Media, so she was a Mede. Okay, so it would make sense that if she gave him a different name before he was named Cyrus, Darius the Mede is a perfectly legitimate one. She was of Median descent. She married. She was a daughter of the king of Media. Okay, so that really is the other one. And then one of the other ones that I think is good evidence is Daniel's text says Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. And we went through some of the extra biblical writings and evidence, and were able to show that, wow, that's pretty, Darius would have been between 61 and 62 years old from the birth and death records that we have for his life. So those are really the four things that those that hold to the Maccabean thesis would bring as objections to the classic theory that Daniel was written in 500-600. Then we looked at some of the positive evidence in history. And the first one that we mentioned was in Daniel 5:5. Daniel mentions in the writing of the wall, it said, the fingers of a man's hand emerged, began to write opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. It's interesting that Daniel uses the word plaster there. It seems to be, that's a detail that you wouldn't think that he would actually put in there. But it turns out when they excavated a certain palace, I'm just going to read this quote. I forget who the quote is from. The excavation of the palace has uncovered beyond 3 impressive courtyards a large room, which has become known as the throne room. Inside the throne room and facing the doorway, there's a recessed niche in the wall, probably indicates where the king's throne stood. One wall was adorned with a design in blue emerald bricks, but the others were covered with white plaster. Covered with white plaster. So this archaeological dig actually uncovered Belshazzar's throne room, and it's verified that some of those walls in that throne room were covered in plaster. Okay, very interesting. It's one of those details that you read the text and, how many of you have even ever worked with plaster? I mean, we use drywall these days and stuff like that. That just is a detail that Daniel puts in there, I think, by the inspiration of the Spirit, to knowing that someday that may become a detail that's significant. Again, it places lots of evidence. Somebody writing in 165 BC seems very unlikely that they would include an element like that in detail, actually saying, oh, he wrote on the plaster wall over there. How would they know that? Okay, this was just uncovered, not too recently. Daniel mentions that Belshazzar could offer the third ruler of the kingdom as a reward for whoever could interpret the writing on the wall. It's known that Belshazzar's father, Nabonidus, he was off for the last few years of his reign before he died. He was off doing other things and left Belshazzar in charge. So that really kind of establishes that the best that Belshazzar could offer was the third rulership in the kingdom, because his father was the ruler. He was kind of the co-regent in charge while his father was gone. And so the third ruler of the kingdom was the best that he could offer. And then finally, there was one other statement in Daniel 8:2. He says, while I was looking in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam, and we actually mentioned that back in Daniel's day, Susa was a province of Elam, but it later on was put into a different province, and it was fairly unlikely that someone writing in 165 BC would have known that. Okay, that's one of those details that, again, doesn't seem like that should be in the book of Daniel if it was written late. Okay, all right. Let's see. Daniel was well aware about the Babylonian culture that used in their mathematics a sexagesimal system, which is based on 6 instead of 10. So when he says the height of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar made in Daniel 3 was 60 cubits by 6 cubits to width, so everything based on the number 6. Again, by the time of the Greek Empire and in the 150s and 60s BC, the decimal system had taken hold, and it's unlikely that someone writing in 165 would have known the details of Babylonian mathematics. Excuse me. Daniel was also familiar in the text with the execution style differences between the Babylonians and the Medes. Okay, the Babylonians preferred execution by fire. Okay, they were all about that, but the Medes, one of their gods, greatly revered fire, so they didn't execute people by fire. They used wild beasts. They preferred the lions and that kind of stuff. So interesting that Daniel mentions something that someone writing in 500 or 600 BC would have known, but probably not someone in 165. The other detail is, remember, after Daniel was saved from the lion's den, what did Darius do to those people that accused him? He threw them in. Who else did he throw in? Their family, all of them, him and the family. Okay, that was very peculiar to the Persians. They tend to execute the entire family of a guilty person. Okay. Jews did not do that. Every person's responsible for their own sin. And so someone writing in 165 probably was fairly unlikely to have included a detail that the Persians put all of the family members into the lion's den as punishment on those that accused Daniel. Another one, the entire posture relationship between Daniel and the kings, of Babylon and the Medo-Persia, very favorable to the Jews. That was not the case in 165. Antiochus Epiphanes hated the Jews, slaughtered a lot of them, and it's very unlikely that a Jew writing or anyone else writing going back to a Gentile ruler would actually speak favorably about these kings because the Jews hated them too. So fairly unlikely that the context and the way they wrote would be done there. So that kind of brings us up to speed a little bit. Those are the kind of things you missed. You can go back to week, I think it's 2 and 3, that have the details there. Honestly, I wish I had a lot more time to do this. We could keep going till into next year with this kind of stuff. Especially this particular lesson on the language. I wish I had the time to actually look up and go and really do a much better job on this, but I really got to just skim the surface. We want to get to the text of Daniel starting next week. So this is our last week. I have to really skim over this kind of stuff quickly. I'm not an expert in Hebrew or Aramaic, Archimedean, that kind of stuff. If I was retired, I probably would have had 20 hours to do this, and I could have shown you the words and all this kind of stuff, done a much better job. But I've included lots of different references and footnotes in this particular this particular one. I did this timeline here on the last page that we'll try to reference here and there, but let's go. It's the basic language of the text of Daniel is at issue here. The Maccabean view is make lots of claims, but there's actually much evidence in the language itself that support the early dating of Daniel, about mid 500 BC. All right, so Daniel is in fact written in two different languages. Okay, the first part of Daniel is written in Hebrew. Okay, and then at chapter 2, it switches to Aramaic, and it switches to Aramaic in a very important spot. It even warns us in the text that that's going to happen. In chapter 2, verse 4, it says, "Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic." And then from then on to the end of chapter 7, the text is in Aramaic. And then starting in chapter 8, it picks up again in Hebrew to the end of the book. So you got 3 sections of Daniel. You got a Hebrew section, then an Aramaic section in the middle, and then a Hebrew section at the end. And really the content makes a lot of sense because Daniel is describing the events in Nebuchadnezzar's life and Darius's life that would be of particular interest to Gentiles. And they would be wanting to read that in Aramaic, not really Hebrew. Okay? So, before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that was in the 1920s, I believe, the earliest manuscript that had the book of Daniel in it is called the Masoretic text. And that's dated around 1000 AD. Okay, so it's in a complete Bible. It's about 1000 AD. So that's fairly late for an Old Testament book. But the interesting thing about that Masoretic text, that's the first time that we have, and all of our Bibles today are based on that text for the book of Daniel. It actually has that split between Hebrew and Aramaic. Okay, that's where it comes from. Okay, now what's very interesting is that all the discoveries in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you look at your timeline, they were written about the same time as this Maccabean theory. So between 1 and 200 BC, the Dead Sea Scrolls were written. Okay, the Essenes were a very conservative, strict group of copyists that copied ancient documents. They were so strict in their copying, they included misspelled words. They wouldn't change the spelling or update the spelling if it was misspelled. They would leave it misspelled when they copied it. That's how strict they were in their copying and acceptance of the text. Now, that's important because how likely is it that a group of very strict copyists would actually accept a book of Daniel that was written in their own time frame and assign that as inspired scripture? That's not very likely. These things took time to be accepted by religious communities as authoritative. Okay? Not only that, but Daniel, by the Maccabean theory people, that is labeled as apocalyptic literature, very special type of literature. Unfortunately for them, all other apocalyptic literature written in that time frame is written in Greek. It's written in Greek. Why would you have apocalyptic literature, namely the book of Daniel, that they label this, special type? Why would that be written in not Greek? Makes no sense. Every other apocalyptic literature of the times written in Greek. That was the language of the day. So it's fairly unlikely that's going to be used. And that's also important because, the Jews did not canonize any books that were not written in Hebrew or Aramaic. If it was written in any other language, they didn't make the canon. That's why all of those apocryphal books that the Roman Catholic Church actually ascribes, Bell and the Dragon, and all of these other things that they accept as inspired scripture, those are written in Greek. Those are written in Greek. They're not written in Hebrew or Aramaic originally. Okay. Okay. So now let's look at the timeline here. This is another interesting point. We want to focus on just the Hebrew of Daniel. Okay. After lots of different analysis and stuff, it turns out that the Hebrew, the style and the syntax and the words and all of that kind of stuff that are in the book of Daniel, very similar to that Hebrew found in Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles, and Esther. I've put those here in that time frame, 500 to 600. That's when it's absolutely for sure those books were written. Okay, Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles, Esther. That's the time frame where some of those were written. They were written in Hebrew. Okay, and a comparison between the Hebrew of Daniel and the Hebrew of these texts actually shows very similar, Hebrew, whatever that means. Okay, again, I apologize, I'm not a Hebrew expert, but I'm relying on folks that are Hebrew experts. All of those Old Testament books were written at least before the 5th century BC. And it really places the Hebrew of Daniel in that same time frame because it's so similar to those other ones. Okay, so I want to just read a paragraph here in his work, A History of the Hebrew Language. Angel Sayans Baladas states that the Hebrew of Daniel is more closely related to the Hebrew of the Torah than is Chronicles or Ezra. Okay, the Torah was actually before those books. So what he's saying is the Hebrew of Daniel is actually older than the book of Chronicles or Ezra. Okay, now it's interesting. This fella actually holds to the Maccabean view of Daniel, even though he just pretty much proved that the Hebrew of Daniel is 5th century or earlier. Okay. He actually believes that the author in 165 purposefully used Old Hebrew to make it look older than it was, though he doesn't provide any evidence for that. He just throws a theory out. Whoever wrote it wrote in old style Hebrew to make it look like it was written long ago, but it really wasn't. And he doesn't provide any evidence for that. That's what he believes. More power to you. All right, that's the Hebrew. The Hebrew really is evidence that Daniel was written between 500 and 600 BC. Now, how about the Aramaic? Well, it's always been claimed by people that hold the Maccabean view that the Aramaic of Daniel really is a type of Aramaic that fits in the Maccabean theory time period, the 165-ish, okay? That is called late Aramaic. And if you look at the language timeline chart, your very last page, I've kind of broken up the known and markable portions of the Aramaic language that are in existence. So from prior to about 900, there was an old style of Aramaic that really didn't look like Aramaic. It was a different language altogether. But between 900 and 700 BC, that type of Aramaic they've labeled as Old Aramaic. And they found that on different tablets and cuneiforms and cylinders, that kind of stuff. But between 700 and 300 is a specific form of Aramaic called Imperial Aramaic. Now, why would it be called Imperial Aramaic? Well, that's really the rise and fall of the Babylonian kingdom occurred in those time frames. And certainly the Babylonians existed even after their downfall, and they used that form of Aramaic that's called Imperial. Between 300 and 200, it kind of really was transitioning. I didn't have enough room to actually write Middle Aramaic on the little bar. It was only 100 years there. But the mid there means Middle Aramaic. It's kind of transitioning to, a different form because of, the Medo-Persian Empire and the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire, really the language started to evolve and into what they call late Aramaic, that goes from about 200 BC to about 700 AD. And then from there on, basically is modern Aramaic up to the present age. So the contention by the Maccabean thesis folks is that the Aramaic of Daniel is late Aramaic between 1 and 200. And of course, the what's left to prove for the classical datist is that the language of Aramaic in Daniel is actually Imperial Aramaic. Okay, so once again, biblical archaeology really comes to the rescue of the classic position. The discoveries in some ancient papyri in Egypt and some discoveries that found portions of the book of Ezra, which is also written in Aramaic. They've conclusively demonstrated that the Aramaic of Daniel is Imperial Aramaic. It is absolutely Imperial Aramaic. And why is that important? Because Imperial Aramaic was part of the language in the 500-600 BCs when the events of Daniel are claimed to have been written. Okay, so here's a paragraph. The Aramaic is almost exactly the same as that which is found in portions of Ezra on account of the large number of Babylonian and Persian words, characteristic of this Aramaic and that of the papyri recently found in Egypt, as well as on the account of the general similarity of the nominal, verbal, and other forms, and of the syntactical construction. The Aramaic of this period might be properly called Babylonian Persian Aramaic or Imperial Aramaic. The composite Aramaic of Daniel agrees in almost every particular of orthography, etymology, syntax with the Aramaic of the North Semitic inscriptions of the 9th, 8th, and 7th centuries BC, and of the Egyptian papyri of the 5th century BC. And that vocabulary of Daniel has an admixture of Hebrew, Babylonian, and Persian words similar to that of the papyri of the 5th century BC. So lots of different wordsmithing in there. The bottom line is that the Aramaic that has been uncovered by archaeological evidence in Daniel, they found things in 7, 8, 900 that have similar vocabulary. They found 500 BC inscriptions in an Egyptian papyri, that same time frame. All of these point to an Aramaic that is imperial in nature for that time frame, and that is the nature of the Aramaic in Daniel. Okay. Rather than go into a lot of detail, there's one other paragraph that I've included, has a reference down there, Aramaic of Daniel in light of Old Aramaic. That's the Journal for the Study of the Old Testament, and there are several authors that are contributing to that paragraph. Essentially, the first sentence, I think, is the home run ball. As far as the Aramaic words, 90% of them are found in the texts of 5th century BC or earlier. Okay, other extra biblical texts, and there's one other thing that's in the next section. I'll do that, but there's a couple of things in the middle of that paragraph. Many of the terms that the Maccabean hypothesis folks label as, this has to be very late. They've already been established as very early in the 8th to 5th centuries by a couple of papyri. The Elephantine papyri is the 6th century BC, and they've discovered Old Aramaic treaty texts from Sapphire. I think that's a place, okay? All of that. It's interesting that there's at least one detail, a form that's found in Daniel that did not survive past the 5th century BC. Okay, so it's interesting that Daniel has it in there. It's a preposition before a king's name, is in Daniel's text. And by 500 BC, that had disappeared. That tradition of putting this preposition in front of a king's name, that disappeared. And so it's interesting that it appears in the text of Daniel. It could not have appeared in the text of a Maccabean writing in between 1 and 200 BC. That's probably my favorite one. I like those, that there's no way that it just had gone out of favor and that kind of stuff. The conclusion in the Aramaic, it says the Aramaic documents from Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, especially the Targum to Job, which is a specific document, they've been evaluated as pointing quite definitively to a pre-2nd century date for the Aramaic of Daniel. Okay, they use the term pre-2nd century date really to mean doesn't agree with the Maccabean theory. It's not saying that these are only at 200 AD. Most of them are well before that, and that's what that comment actually means. So, okay, the Aramaic actually strongly supports the writing of Daniel in the 5th and 6th century BC. Okay, the final section is foreign loan words. Foreign loan words. Words in the text in a different language that are either transliterated, letter by letter, that kind of stuff, or not known what the terms meant. The first particular language is Akkadian, and that was really spoken in the early Babylonian years. Some of the cuneiform tablets that they found are in Akkadian. That seems more like hieroglyphic type language. It's very picturesque and stuff, a little bit different than Aramaic. Old Aramaic replaced it by the 8th century BC, but they have still found Akkadian texts and stuff like that. There's at least 12 words from that ancient Babylonian language that are found in the Aramaic sections of Daniel. And that really indicates that both the Aramaic and the Hebrew belong to that Babylonian period between 5 and 600, because these words are not found in any text in any language after the 5th century BC. Okay, they've just disappeared. The words have just disappeared. Nobody knew of their existence of the words. However, they're in the text of Daniel. Okay. Again, strongly supports 5th century BC writing. Okay, how about Persian words? The Persian words. This is where I really wish that I had some knowledge of this kind of stuff and could show it on the board, show you what the English translation was, where it was. I can do that for the Greek, but not this Aramaic and Persian stuff. The New International, the Critical Commentary lists 14 different Persian words in the Aramaic section of Daniel, and 3 in the Hebrew sections. Of these 17 Persian words, 8 are words of official titles, which is not surprising. Daniel had an official title. He was a government official, high position in both the Babylonian and the Persian court. It's not surprising that he would be familiar with these Persian loanwords. Okay, let's see what else. That's an interesting one. The Persian terms found in Daniel are specifically Old Persian words. They occur within the history of the language to about 300 BC. So again, there's a hard stop with using these words about 300 BC. After that, okay, they didn't use them, i.e. the Maccabean theory puts the date after that. Okay, and that's some more evidence. A good example of this is Ashpenaz in Daniel 1:3 in the Hebrew section, which was not understood in Greek times. And it was translated as a personal name with an unknown meaning, but it's now known that this is an Old Persian term and it means innkeeper. Innkeeper. Interesting. Innkeeper. And if you read that in the context of the book of Daniel, you might find that kind of interesting. There's Persian loan words and genre in Daniel, all of them are determined to be Old Persian words, and some would wonder why this Jew would be using Persian words in his book, and how he would know it. And the answer is Cyrus was a Persian, and Daniel. This is an opinion for this. Daniel, being the gifted statesman and fast learner that he would have had to learn Persian to retain his position in Cyrus's government. Okay, that's a reasonable explanation. Okay, reasonable explanation. All right. The bottom line is the use of Persian loan words indicates a Babylonian or Persian origin and not a Palestinian one, i.e., can't be the Maccabean thesis. Many of these old Persian words had already fallen out of existence by 300 BC, and they're not attested to in any writings after that. So it's unlikely that someone in 165 would have known to put those old Persian words in this relatively new text. Okay. All right. Probably the most interesting one, at least from my standpoint, is the Greek loan words. The Greek loan words. It's without a doubt, and they still hold this view. The folks that support the Maccabean theory, they insist that there are certain words within the Aramaic of Daniel chapter 3, and that would be 3:5, okay, is the particular verse. And the claim is that these Greek words that name musical instruments, okay, if you look at 3:5, it says, remember the context. Nebuchadnezzar set up the big statue. He said, when you hear the music, bow down and worship, okay? And it's in verse 5 in chapter 3, it says, at that moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music. You're to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. Okay? Now, it's claimed that those three of those words, NASB translates it lyre, psaltery, and bagpipe. Okay? If you got King James, it would be harp, psaltery, and dulcimer. Okay? It's claimed that those three words were not known in the 5th and 6th century BC. Okay, they were only known because of the Greek influence, in the Hellenistic age, perfect setting for the Maccabean theory. Okay, so that is the claim. Okay, there's actually written proof that they would use that those words are kind of confined between the period of 428 and 322 BC. Aristotle mentions them, Plato mentions them, but it is interesting that all three of those Greek loan words correspond to musical instruments. That's kind of strange. If this book was written in 165, right in the middle, in the height of the Greek civilization, you would have thought there would have been a lot more Greek words in this book, wouldn't you? Just these three musical instruments. Okay, that's one claim that I think they have trouble explaining why there's not more Greek words. So these three musical instruments are in there. Is there evidence that these words were known prior to the Greek Empire, actually coming, on the rise? Here's a quote from Harrison. Harrison notes that the instruments that these words refer to, they were known in ancient Near East, even on Assyrian reliefs, inscriptions. When were the Assyrians? Before the Babylonians. Okay, did the Greeks exist in 1000 BC? Sure, the people did, right? The people did, the language did. The empire didn't until Alexander the Great. They didn't conquer the world, but the language and the people certainly existed, and they have found reference in an Assyrian tablet that makes reference to these Greek instruments, these words, okay? And it shouldn't be a surprise that Greek instruments were used in Babylonia. I read one commentator, and actually was quite humorous. He said that musical scholars have actually uncovered all the particulars of strictly Babylonian instruments and music and the type of things that they played. They've replicated it with modern instruments and they've played it. And the rumor is it's the most boring music you have ever heard in your entire life. It's horribly constructed music. It certainly is not worthy in religious worship that they had, even though they were false gods. I think that's humorous, that boring music goes with false gods. So it's not a surprise that eventually the Babylonians brought Greek musical instruments into their culture because their own music was boring. I thought that was funny. So, just like today, people in the ancient world traveled from place to place, and upon their return, they bring back new ideas and new products. Greek mercenaries served in the Babylonian army. Okay, we know that. There was found a Greek expatriate community in Babylonia dating to the 6th century and earlier. And if those Greeks brought any of their culture with them, one would expect them to bring musical instruments. Okay, those weren't usually, huge things. They were small enough to carry, and music and, of course, food was one of the first things to cross cultural boundaries. Okay, so it's certainly the musical instruments and the words were known well before 165. So the real claim that they hold on to, that these words weren't known by then, I think is easily proven false. It's been proven false by, again, archaeological studies. That really is the main theme here. Archaeology really has demonstrated beyond question in my mind that Daniel was written between 5 and 600 BC. Okay. One last comment. The avalanche of evidence has demonstrated the presence of Greek language in Semitic milieu long before the 6th century BC. Greeks entered the Near East by the 9th century BC. They built a temple in that area by 675 BC. Greek pottery's been found there in abundance, dating to the 7th century BC. And Oppenheim discovered 2 documents dating from 550 and 551 BC describing trade between the Neo-Babylonians and the Near East and the merchants of Greece, Tyre, and Yamana. Okay. Again, evidence of lots of different ways that these musical instruments could have been discovered or included in the book of Daniel. Here's a couple of pictures. The lyre, that's why some would translate, that's why the King James translates it harp. Looks like a harp, doesn't it? The lyre. Psaltery was, I don't know, I've never seen it almost looks like, kind of a guitar, but, the strings are different lengths and all that kind of stuff. Interesting. The music, look, you got a resonator. It looks like a box with a couple holes in it, similar to a guitar. And you'll notice that I skipped the dulcimer or bagpipe because, in my opinion, that is the most obnoxious musical instrument ever invented. Everyone knows what it looks like. The ancient ones, you can go on Google and look at them. But, I'm biased by the Scottish kind of bagpipe. I'm sure that's what I got in my head for bagpipe. I'm sure a real bagpipe in the Babylonian Empire was much more melodical, okay? So I skipped that. You all know what that is, okay? So the conclusion here is that the Hebrew indicates and the Aramaic demands a date of Daniel before the 2nd century BC, most likely in the late 6th to early 5th century. The Persian and Akkadian foreign words point to an early date, as do the Greek loanwords, unquestionably. Okay? There would be one more section that I would have covered, but I'm just going to make a comment about it. And that one of the other areas that those that support the Maccabean view would try to bring against the early dating of Daniel is in the area of theology. They would say that theologically, Daniel could not have been written in the middle of the 5th century BC. And they would have numerous examples. They would say, for example, just one example, the angelology that's described in Daniel is too advanced for the 5th and 6th century BC. It's more in line with what was believed about angels in 165 or so. Now, the problem with using theology to actually demonstrate when something was written or not written, it's just very subjective. Okay, when you read that text, it's that author's opinion that the angelology is too advanced to be 5th or 6th century. Very subjective, really holds no weight in my mind at all. The various different areas of theology that they complain about. It is what it is. And I don't see or understand how you could rationally argue that the theology is too developed to have been written in a certain amount of time. Okay. My opinion, that's free. I won't charge you for that. Lots of stuff in the advanced work, a lot of different things. Some of them are websites that you can go and actually see the actual source of lots of the quotes I have here. Most of this is from all of these citations. Some of them you may have trouble finding because you got to subscribe to some technical journal or something like that. I have a couple of those things here and there in PDF if you're that interested, but that should be the end of our introduction to the dating and authorship of Daniel. Next week, I want to get right into 1:1. We're going to have to go slow because there still is, even though we did some sufficient background, as we go along in the text, there'll be certain features in the text that will need some background. And I'm probably going to start next week with at least a short summary of Babylonian religion. It's important to understand why Nebuchadnezzar brought the articles from the Jewish temple to Babylon, back to Babylon. Just wasn't, and usually, what would you do with booty that you got from another country in terms of gold and silver? Where would you put that if you brought it to your place? You put it in your treasury or your bank or whatever you call it. Okay. Nebuchadnezzar brought these things and put them in the temple of Marduk. Okay. It's an interesting change of thing there, and it really relates to the Babylonian religions and stuff. And so I hope to get through some of Daniel chapter 1. It may take 2 weeks to get through Daniel chapter 1, but we're just going to go ahead and start in the text. It'll be a long journey. Like I said, the language stuff, I wish I had more time. Next time I teach this 10 years from now, I'll be retired and I'll have the time to do that. There'll be a different forum than paper, I'm sure. Screen up here, show you those Aramaic words and stuff. Not that they don't mean nothing to me either, but just seeing them. If you look at the text, where it switches from Hebrew to Aramaic, if you don't know those languages, you look at that and you're like, I don't see any difference there. It looks like gibberish. It's the same gibberish-looking stuff if you don't know either one of those languages. But apparently, there's a real strict, someone that knows that. Here, switch to Aramaic, that kind of stuff. Obvious, but to those of us that don't recognize that, it just looks like all the same stuff. So, okay, questions? Yeah. I think it may have been a Roman type construct. I believe the the dating scheme of the Romans eventually referenced, somehow year zero. I don't know how they determined year zero. But years before that is BC. BC? Yeah, it's just kind of, the Jews have a calendar that go from zero creation and, all the way forward. But, for whatever reason, the Romans decided it was easier, to adopt their system. They used the 10 system, so 100 years, centuries were important to them and that kind of stuff. But why we continue to stick with that, I'm not sure. There kind of is a clue that in the days of the tribulation period, the Antichrist may change that, change that to a different type dating system. So, yeah, we won't be there to see it. That's okay. I don't care about dates and that kind of stuff. And everyone that's alive during that time won't care about it either, right? So, okay. Any other questions? Yeah, Chris.
The loan word argument is pretty weak since Greece is so close to Persia and Babylon, geographically right next to each other. And then I was thinking about what loan words do we have? I think all these food words, crepe, or
Yeah,
spaghetti,
right.
pie.
That's right. The transliterations, is spaghetti. Okay, it's an Italian word, right? I think, although some people will say, no, it's actually a Chinese word, But yeah, spaghetti. We take that and cross that over and imagine if, we wrote a cookbook that referenced lots of spaghetti dishes. And then 1,000 years from now, the word spaghetti is never used again. And, someone said, hey, this cookbook was written way out here. And we said, well, wait a second. The word spaghetti is used. It has to be written in 2022 because spaghetti it wasn't used 1,000 years from now. That's the picture of some of the language issues in Daniel. Some of the words that Daniel uses had already fallen out of existence. Their meaning has been lost and their usage just gone, disappeared from historical writings of any kind in any language. Really is, I think, strong support for the early date. So, okay. Next week, start right at Daniel 1:1. We'll finally get to the text. So I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Huh? Oh, still going, yeah. Let me turn my mic off so that the